Hello, today I'm doing the Bookish drummer tag. This is an original tag created by Jake, the Bookish drummer. I was also tagged by Andrew from Andrew's Wizardly Reads. Definitely check out both channels. Jake focuses a lot on Stephen King on his channel, and also he is doing a book club right now on Stephen King short stories starting in November. They're reading one Stephen King short story a week. So if that interests you, please check out his channel and his Discord. And Andrew also has a wonderful channel in Discord. Definitely check out both. They're wonderful. I like this tag a lot because it has a lot of musical terminology for the prompts. And at the end, you get to form your own booktube band, which I think is very creative when you tag people. So number one is, drum roll, name a book with a great buildup. And for this, I'm going to go with 11/22/63. I know this is not a popular opinion for a lot of people, including Jake, the Bookish drummer, but I loved this book. This was about a man who traveled through a portal at the back of a cafe to the 1950s. And the idea was for him to live through until the 1960s to prevent the assassination of JFK, thus preventing the atrocities that happened thereafter, including Vietnam. And so a lot of the book deals with the 50s and 60s. It's kind of like a historical fiction, sort of meets sci-fi horror type of book. Well, more like sci-fi, I guess, and historical fiction. But I really enjoyed the buildup until the main event. Now, that's kind of controversial because I know a lot of people tend to feel like the story kind of meanders a bit. But I did feel that way at one point for a minute. But then when I took a step back and I thought about what Stephen King was doing, I felt like everything in that story had purpose. So I personally thought it all worked together. It all built up perfectly to that event. And I wouldn't have changed a thing about it. So that is my answer for number one. Number two, Downbeat, name a book that made you sad, depressed. There have been so many books that have made me cry this year for some reason. But I'm going to go with the one that made me cry last, which was Reaper's Gale, Malazan Book of the Fallen, Book 7 by Stephen Erickson. This book was it was such a surprise to me because I didn't think it was affecting me emotionally for the most part until the last chunk of the book. It completely surprised me how emotional I got, how much I cried. I cried so hard at the end of that book. And of course, I won't give away why because of spoilers, but I do have a spoiler-filled discussion if you've read the book and you want to hear my thoughts on it. Number three, Upbeat, name a book that made you happy. I don't read a lot of happy books. I mostly read books that are very dark in tone, but the closest I can come up with for this answer is another book that made me cry, but for different reasons, I think. And that is Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien, which I read earlier this year. And it really opened up my heart. I had a wonderful discussion with Philip Chase about this book and some of the elements that make this beautiful, but also heartbreaking and heart-opening at the same time. There's something really incredible about what Tolkien does in this book that we discuss more deeply in that discussion. So definitely check it out if that interests you. But I really loved The Lord of the Rings. I loved the book so much, the trilogy book, whatever you want to call it. Number four, Offbeat, name a book that felt unique to you. There are so many books I could talk about on this channel that are unique in structure, but I think the book I'm going to go with is Susanna Clarke's Piranesi. This is such a beautiful book, beautiful story. The prose is absolutely stunning in this book. We follow a character named Piranesi who is in this quote unquote house that has infinite number of halls and statues. It has an ocean level floor, and he is all alone in this house, but he doesn't feel alone because he is so connected to everything in the house. There is one other person, though, he calls the other, and this other person is working with Piranesi to find this great and secret knowledge. And that's just about all I want to say for now. It's best to go into this book not knowing much. You will feel probably a bit lost at first. That is the common experience, but things will unveil, they will unfold as you read on. and it is so worthwhile. I don't recommend this book for everyone, though, saying that. I've told Alan several times, I don't think Alan at the Library of Alexandria would like this book, but most other people probably agree it's a beautiful book and it's very unique. Number 5, Crescendo, name a book that got better as you read it. And for this, I'm going to go with Dead House Gates, Malazan Book of the Fallen, number 2, because to be honest, I did have some struggles getting into this book. I found it just was so different than what I was expecting. And I was expecting something a little more like Gardens of the Moon. Even though I had struggles with the book, I found long after reading it, I couldn't stop thinking about it. And I thought about storylines in the book. I thought about so many things. And so that book became much more meaningful over time, not only after reading it and giving it space after reading it, but also after reading further on in the series and seeing how storylines in that book connected to other storylines in future books. So that book is one actually I really look forward to rereading someday. I look forward to rereading Dead House Gates more than any other book in the series so far. And I can definitely say it got better, especially at the end. The end is very, very powerful. I don't think anybody can argue with that. Number 6, Decrescendo, name a book that got worse as you read it. I hate to be so negative about books, but there is one that comes to mind, and that is The Coldest Girl in Cold Town by Holly Black. Now, this is about a girl. It starts off so strong. Like there's this girl, a teenage girl who wakes up after partying all night. And typically you would imagine the scene of a party the day after with a bunch of hungover teenagers sprawled out, passed out. And instead of them all being passed out, hungover, they're all dead. So it's a bunch of dead teenagers because of vampires. And so the story is a vampire one, but I just didn't think it went in a very good direction after that for me personally. And it could be that I just wasn't the target audience. Maybe I was just a little too old for it or something, but I just found the character didn't make the wisest choices, in my opinion. I just couldn't get behind the main protagonist's choices. And I didn't like the relationships very much. I did not like this whole villain monologue at the end. I thought it was very corny. So it just wasn't for me. I'm sure it has its audience though. I did listen to this on audio, and I will say the narrator was fantastic. That was probably the only reason I kept going. It had promise at the beginning, but not quite the direction I was hoping. Number 8, Ghost Notes. Name your favorite horror thriller book. And for this, I'm going to go with The Child Thief by Bram, which I've been recently talking about. This is a very dark Peter Pan retelling. Peter in this book is this wicked elvish boy, but he is stealing children from very broken homes of drug addiction, child abuse, molestation, that kind of thing, and taking them away to the magical place called Avalon. So there are some King Arthur allusions in there. I was surprised how fascinating I found this book, especially as I learned more about the world and the way that this author played with the characters of Peter Pan and subverted certain tropes. There were some major surprises towards the end. And I just found some of the psychology of some of the characters really interesting. Number 9, Flam'boyant. Name a book with a pretty cover. There are so many I could point to. I could easily point to Piranesi again by Susanna Clark. I think this cover is gorgeous, and this was so kindly gifted to me from Joanna Sousa. This was a birthday gift from Joanna, and I just appreciate it so much. I had to read a library copy earlier this year, so I'm so happy to own a physical copy of this book. So that's one of my choices, but I'm also going to go with another choice since I mentioned Piranesi earlier, and I feel like, you have to add variety to these tags. And so for that, I'm going to go with Memories of Ice by Stephen Erickson. I got this copy earlier this year thanks to Dominish Books, and I love it. I think it's so beautiful. So yeah, this is a beautiful, beautiful book. Number 10, Resonance. Name a book that resonated with you. And for this, I know I keep going back to Malazan, but Malazan Book of the Fallen is a series that is deeply resonating with me right now in my life. And for this, I am going to go with Gardens of the Moon, because I didn't know anything about Malazan Book of the Fallen when I picked up this book. And I was just so captivated by the tone, by Erickson's prose, by this world, by the magic. the settings, the characters, everything. I just really felt immersed. I felt like everything almost became still around me as I read, like I didn't want to be anywhere else but in this book. And as soon as I finished it, I felt like I could go back to the beginning and reread it. I tabbed it up, as you could tell. And it was interesting going back over some of the tabs after I finished it, because I felt like I had new context at the end of the book when I initially read those passages. And it's just fascinating the way that Erikson plays with perspective in this book. Really was impressed when I read this book. Yeah, I think it's one that definitely resonated with me for sure. Number 11 in the pocket, name a book with great pacing. And for that, I'm going to go with The Dark Tower, book 3, The Wastelands, because I thought the pacing felt really good for me in that book. But I have to say, I think pacing is so subjective. And I don't agree with the idea that fast-paced is always good and slow-paced is always bad. A lot of it will depend on my mood personally, and sometimes I'm way more in the mood for a slow burn than a fast-paced book. But with The Wastelands, I can say that I didn't feel like any sort of sense that it felt too slow or too fast for me. I thought the pacing was really great in that book, so I'll just go with that answer. Drum solo, name a great SFF standalone. And for this, I'm going to go with Octavia Butler's Kindred. This was a book I read last year, and I was so impressed. It's a time travel book, but it was written in the 1970s. The main character, Dana, is a Black woman married to a white man, and she mysteriously keeps getting transported back to the early 1800s to the antebellum South, and interacting with a great-great-grandfather who is white, but she is identified as a Black slave during that time. So there's a really interesting dynamic there. And when she comes back, it's just an interesting contrast to look at racism, how racism is still affecting the modern times versus, but just in a different way than it was back then. Even though this is a time travel story, the time travel isn't thoroughly explained, and I liked that. I like that it is kept very mysterious in that way to sort of bring the themes to the forefront. And it's a book that I would definitely reread. I just loved it. Number 13, Drum Battle, name a SFF book with great battle scenes. Well, the easy answer to this would be The Bone Hunters, Malazan Book of the Fallen, book 6. But since I've already given Malazan a lot of attention in this tag, I guess another book I could go with is The Sword of Kaigen. There is a really intense battle or war scene that happens in a good chunk of the book, and I thought it was very powerful. I thought it was very well done. There were certainly parts of the book that weren't to my taste, that I thought maybe the tonal shifts were a little abrupt for me, and I wasn't as crazy about certain flashback sequences in the book. But the battle, the war, the theme of propaganda, all these things were fascinating. The aftermath of the war, highly recommend for those scenes for sure. Number 14, Buzzworthy, name a book you're excited to read. There are so many, basically everything I have yet to read for the rest of the year, especially Malazan, books 8, 9, and 10. I'm also very excited to read on in the Dark Tower series. And then number 15, Jam Session, let's start a band, tag some people, and create your own hypothetical booktube band. On lead guitar, I'm going to put Michael K. Vaughan. I love Michael's channel. He brings great attention to so many authors that don't get enough attention, who are very influential in sci-fi, fantasy, horror, and classical literature. Definitely check him out. And on keyboard, I'm going to put Angela, Bookaholic Brown Nymph, since she has tagged me in a couple of tags recently. And so I want to pay her back by tagging her back. She has a wonderful channel. She is loving Malazan Book of the Fallen. I think she's reading Memories of Ice right now, and wonderful stuff on her channel. Definitely check her out. And then on drums, Jake Bishop. I think Jake would be perfect for this tag because he is the other Jake. So why not put him on drums too? And he has wonderful content on Malazan Book of the Fallen, as well as Dresden Files, Wheel of Time. He recently read God is Not Willing. And then on bass guitar, Billy Bonsai. Billy's fantastic. I love his channel. If you're into horror, philosophy, fantasy and someone who's not afraid to go into some very dark themes, definitely check out Billy's channel. Plus, he seems like he should be in a band because he has that cool multi-dimensional bandana. And then lastly, on vocals, I am going to tag Kate, the almost book doctor, because I believe she's a singer in real life. She's also in medical school, so I think she would be awesome. She has some great music content on her channel, like music fantasy content on her channel, like with classical rock and fantasy, like a Queen song book sort of video. It's really interesting. So definitely check out her channel. She's wonderful. I love her so much. These are all wonderful channels. And thank you again to Jake, the Bookish drummer, for tagging me in your original tag. And thank you to Andrew from Andrew's Wizardly Reads for tagging me as well. This was a lot of fun. Please let me know your thoughts on any of my answers below and have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.